Many spent the morning in the town bar, readying themselves for the event. Then came news that the execution had been postponed so that the Georgia Supreme Court could hear a petition by Williams' attorneys for a new trial. The gathering crowds were infuriated. Sheriff Merrell sensed trouble as he tended to some business at the courthouse. He made his way back to his family living quarters in the jail and was followed there by a rapidly expanding group of men. George Bennett, a former from Victory, and Charles Word, father of the murdered boy, were the mob's leader. On the street an hour earlier, Word had promised the sheriff that there would be no trouble. Now he was at the head of the angry group closing in. As they got closer to the sheriff, Word explained, "My friends got too roughed up. I could no longer restrain them." The group grew still larger and soon numbered 500. 500 for one black man. Inside the jail were the sheriff's brother-in-law, J.L. Fletcher, and State Senator W.D. Hambrick, who, having heard about the threat, had stopped by on his way to lunch. The sheriff handed out weapons to the two men, preparing for what was rapidly shaping up to be an assault. Using a sledgehammer, the mob leader, George Bennett, moved in and broke down the massive exterior jail door. Then the group pushed inside and on toward the narrow stairway that led up to Williams' cell and the passage where the sheriff and his posse stood ready. The sheriff's wife stood behind her husband, ready to reload his pair of pistols. That's what's up. Senator Hambrick spoke to the crowd, telling them that the sheriff was their friend, but warning that he would protect his prisoner and pleading with them to back off lest someone be hurt. They didn't even care who was there. They acted a fool in front of the senator, a whole senator. Obey the law, right? Sheriff Merrell called out to the group to stop or be shot. Then as the mob leaders pressed on toward the stairs, the sheriff and his men opened fire. Bennett was shot in the stomach, fell back. Another man shot in the shoulder, also fell back. The mob began to retreat. They wasn't that hard, huh? The mob began to retreat, firing 6 or more rounds at the lawmen, but no one else was hit. The father of the murdered boy stopped, turned back toward the sheriff, and shouted, "You might as well kill me now, Mr. Sheriff. I don't know any better time to die." So dramatic. Then he watched his neighbor Bennett being carried off to the drugstore where he would die before a doctor could be summoned. Fearful that the mob would mount another assault after nightfall, Merrell, along with Carlton Mayor H.W. Long and Judge Sam Harris, telegraphed the governor in Atlanta and asked for help. In response, Governor Allen Chandler issued a proclamation ready by the mayor on the courthouse steps, vowing that the entire military and civil forces of the state will be used to keep order if necessary, and calling on all citizens to disperse or be charged with rioting. Many people obeyed the order and left town. Now here's the thing. If this sheriff who was doing his job could get the Senate and other political figures to help him protect a man's life, whether he was guilty or not, why didn't other lawmen do that in other states and cities? Why did they allow these huge angry mobs, uncontrollable, enraged mobs, go drag men and women and children out of their custody and kill them? You gotta wonder. I'm wondering these men that didn't ask for help, assistance like Sheriff Merrell did, if they wanted that to happen. You know, they were so anti-black, they just didn't care. It was like, oh well, we gonna get you, we gonna kill you in custody or outside. It doesn't matter. You gotta wonder. In Atlanta, Governor Chandler ordered the state militia to commandeer a train and proceed to Carrollton, 60 miles away. 70 officers and soldiers boarded a train at 4 p.m. for the trip. Meanwhile, the mayor and other two leaders organized armed patrols to protect the jail from the mob's return. By 7 p.m., the militiamen arrived at the station in Carrollton. The troops formed up and marched the half-mile to the jail where the sheriff had brought Williams out. The troops arranged themselves around the pair and marched them directly back to the waiting train. There had been threats and rumors of an attack on the train, but there was no immediate trouble, and the party returned to Atlanta and the Fulton Tower before midnight. In his cell that night, Williams spoke to reporters from the Atlanta newspaper, reflecting on his experience of the day, from escaping the gallows to escaping the mob. He spoke of hearing the mob and seeing them approach the passage up to his cell. He had heard the gunfire and felt relief as the assault was repulsed. He impressed the Atlanta reporters, who expressed surprise at his confidence and clarity in relating the details of his trial and his persistent claim of innocence. "I did not kill that boy. I never saw him, but once and never was with him in my life," he told a reporter from the Atlanta Journal. Yeah, right? Now that you think about it, why is this grown black man going to be with a little white boy, knowing damn well? That don't even make no sense. In late July, the Georgia Supreme Court granted Williams a new trial. It was a unanimous decision based on his lawyer's claim that his conviction had relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence. But the legal reprieve did not save his life. Ike Williams died in jail later that year of dropsy, most likely congestive heart failure. He was still awaiting a new trial. That's sad. On June 8, 1901, the Carrollton incident made the front page of the New York Times, and newspapers across the country reprinted the story. Editorials throughout the state of Georgia united in praising his courage and devotion to duty. The governor reiterated Twain's idea that if we had more such sheriffs, such mob violence would be much less and human life would be much safer. The Georgia Supreme Court, in reviewing the trial, referred to this noble man who taught the mob that the law could shoot as well as hang. The Georgia Association of Sheriffs, holding its annual meeting in Columbus in July 1901, unanimously adopted a resolution heartily commending the brave devotion to duty shown recently by Sheriff Merrell of Carroll County in risking his life to protect the life of a prisoner in his county jail from an infuriated mob. The chairman, who had worked to get the resolution passed, unanimously decried a general lack of respect for the courts that allowed lynchers to take men on trial from a courtroom in the presence of a judge and lynch them in front of the courthouse in open daylight, as had happened previously in Columbus. Merrell had done far more than protect a prisoner. He protected a principle, the association chairman said. The reaction in Carroll County to the sheriff's actions was mixed. At least a dozen men sympathetic with or having participated in the mob made public vows to lynch or shoot him. Merrell steadfastly refused to bend. I don't believe any of those in the crowd would, upon serious thought, make an attempt on my life, he said. But if they should, I would not be wholly unprepared. When friends and family urged him to move away from town, he reminisced several years later. I just figured out that if they wanted to get me, they could get me at home as well as anywhere else. So I went right on as usual. But standing up to the mob did bring economic and political consequences. Merrell's brother-in-law was promptly fired from his retail clerk job. What? His employer feared that keeping him on the job would be seen by customers as a reward. Wow. Prompting them to take their business elsewhere. Ooh. Then in the spring of 1902, Merrell was soundly defeated for re-election. Wow. 1,979 votes to 994, a referendum on his actions the previous summer. They was like, we gonna get this end lover out. You will not interfere in us taking their lives, you end lover. From his secluded lake house in upstate New York, Mark Twain paid tribute to Joseph Merrell in his powerful essay against lynching, written just weeks after the incident in Carroll County. Twain referred to Merrell and to a Sheriff Merrell of Indiana, writing, "A Savonarola can quail and scatter a mob of lynchers with a mere glance of his eye. So can Merrell or Merrell, for no mob has any sand in the presence of a man known to be speedily brave. Besides, a lynching mob would like to be scattered, for of a certainty there are never 10 men in it who would not prefer to be somewhere else, and would be if they had had the courage to go." Exactly. You're going to just go ahead and go along with the program, even though you know it is vile and demonic. Twain called these men seasoned great braves. Savonarola glance, which withers mobs with its stern rebuke and disperses them in shame and fear. Most of the praise from Merrell spoke in terms of his having done his duty, and not so much about upholding the rule of law. He himself did not describe his actions in such lofty terms, but simply as having done his duty. It was because he had done his sworn duty, Merrell asserted in a 1902 job application, that Theodore Roosevelt should consider him for a position at the new federal penitentiary in Atlanta. Roosevelt, initially informed by Merrell's actions in 1901 by West Congressman John Adamson, did appoint the former sheriff to the post, but a few years later he cannot save Merrell from a 50% pay cut made by his successor in the White House, William H. Taft. A few other lawmen of courage like Joseph Merrell emerged in the South during those dark years. A sheriff in Alabama who informed a mob that they would have to kill him before they could take him prisoner. Okay, this is what I found when I tried to search other instances of lawmen interfering with the desires of demented, bloodthirsty, anti-black men trying to drag black men out of prison to murder them. In other words, I found Nich, Nista, Neil, Walla, nothing. I found nothing. Not a thing. What's peculiar is, as much as politicians and others in various sectors of this country claim they are so ashamed of America's past concerning Black America, you would think there would be more articles reportings that came down the pipeline about white lawmen ferociously fighting off demonically charged white seething mobs that were hell-bent on taking a black man's, woman's, or child's life. I certainly see pictures and articles after articles about lynchings. Disgusting. But it's like looking for a needle in a million haystacks for morally convicted lawmen who refuse to let a black person be dragged out of their custody to their brutal, frightening death. As I stated, either the lack of reports of that happening is due to there not being many white men with God consciences, lack of care to report these unusual instances of lawmen actually doing their jobs, or this country has a hard on when it comes to discussing how black people were brutally and are brutally decimated in this country. They love hearing it, obviously. Instances in Georgia where imperiled prisoners were transported to safer locations away from an angry citizen, or this same Georgia governor who dispatched the militia to 8 similarly riotous counties in 1888. But the Carroll County story from 1901 was so exceptional and the resistance to the mob so sustained that it stood out and drew the favorable attention of the president and Mark Twain. Publicly opposing an extra-legal execution was significant to mark a white Southerner as a progressive, a liberal on race, and as a traitor in the view of a substantial number of his neighbors. Victim Ike Williams belonged to only the second generation of freed slaves, who by 1901 had witnessed the disappearance of liberties granted after the Civil War, replaced by disenfranchisement, tenant servitude, and vulnerability to mob rule. The Carroll County story is uncommon in the context of regional history. This sheriff, these deputies, these lawyers acted unlike thousands of their peers across the region and over the years. The far more common story had the mob having its way, unimpeded, taking the suspect ahead of any lawman, spreading the word that there was going to be a killing at a set time and place. Assembling the crowd, sometimes mutilating the captive's body, sometimes strangling the captive with a carelessly tied noose rather than more mercifully breaking his neck, and sometimes constructing a pyre and setting fire to a victim. Too frequently, it was the lawmen and other community leaders who arranged for and carried out the murders. I told you, they wanted to do it. That's why it was so many cases of black men being murdered instead of lawmen and court officials and judges intervening and stopping it. Despite Sheriff Merrell's efforts to protect the rule of law, the criminal justice system failed in the case of the murder of Otis Word. On August 22, 1902, the Atlanta Constitution reported that William Moot, a young white man, had been a star witness in the trial that convicted Ike Williams, had been arrested as a primary suspect in Word's murder after confessing to his wife and others. By then, Merrell had been replaced as a sheriff and Ike Williams had died in jail. Didn't I tell y'all? I told you that somebody who looked like that little white boy killed him, and a black man. Ugh, God is gonna get y'all, man. I'm telling you. That will be it. As I stated, I had not, prior to running across this story, I had not heard of white lawmakers defending the life of a black man. I just heard countless stories of black men, women, and children just being dragged out of the custody of sheriffs and out of courts, actually dragged out of courts and murdered in front of the court. You know, that's what you mainly hear. But hearing somebody actually have a God conscience and no, it was beyond him just doing his job. I'm sure he had a conviction in his soul, nah, this is not gonna happen on my watch. And so think about all the other people who allowed it to happen. That's how vile. That there is such a vileness and so much blood that's soaked in this soil. So much blood of the people who looked like me that's soaked in this soil. Do you know the Bible says that the blood of man, especially people who were killed for no reason, their blood cries out for vengeance? Could you imagine how much blood of our people is in the soil crying out for vengeance? And when that vengeance comes, just think about the most hardcore racists that you've ever run across or heard about. Now imagine them on their knees begging for mercy with fear in their eyes. You know, one day I'm going to tell some stories of some interactions I had, not primarily about racists. Thank God I haven't had too many interactions with that. I had small racist things. And I've been called the N-word, and I wanted to light them up with fire from the sky when that happened. But this experience, some of the experiences I want to talk about is beyond its physical appearance. It was straight spiritual, it was straight satanic. And I've seen the biggest, most baddest, hardcore people brought down to nothing. So I'm just giving you an example. Just think about the most hardest, cruelest racists you've ever heard of. And now imagine them on their knees, literally begging for mercy because of the seeds they planted being reaped in their lives. All right. Thank you for your time. I appreciate your support. And I would appreciate so much if you like, comment, and subscribe, and even share my content. It'll help out. I just started building this channel this year in January. So your support and participation will be greatly appreciated. Thank you.